A household name for over a century, Evinrude promised its bold E-TEC outboards would revolutionize boating, cleaner, stronger, maintenance-free. But beneath the marketing, a scandal was brewing. Engine failures, skyrocketing warranty claims, and a corporate downfall that blindsided loyal owners. How did a legendary brand unravel so spectacularly? And why are those who trusted Evinrude now left furious? The answers begin with a legacy both admired and deeply scarred. In 1907, old Evinrude filed a patent that would change boating forever. His invention, the first practical outboard motor, turned quiet lakes and winding rivers into new frontiers. Evinrude engines became a symbol of freedom and reliability, powering fishing boats, family outings, and rescue missions for generations. By the middle of the 20th century, the brand's blue and silver decals were as familiar as the sound of summer on the water. For decades, Evinrude stood at the center of American marine engineering. Their signature two-stroke engines were prized for their simplicity, lightweight, and punchy acceleration. Mechanics praised their ruggedness. Boaters trusted them to start on the first pull year after year. The company's reputation grew alongside the outboard market itself, earning a place in the hearts of everyone from small-town anglers to championship racers. But the world around Evinrude was changing. In the 1980s, new federal emission standards swept across the industry. The Environmental Protection Agency and the California Air Resources Board introduced strict rules aimed at reducing exhaust from marine engines. Outboards, once celebrated for their raw power, were suddenly under scrutiny for their smoke and pollution. The rules arrived in waves, first as Tier 1, then Tier 2 and Tier 3, each step demanding cleaner, more efficient designs. The clock was ticking for every manufacturer still relying on traditional two-stroke technology. The regulatory pressure didn't just threaten Evinrude's market share, it put the company's entire legacy at risk. Competing brands like Mercury and Yamaha began to invest heavily in four-stroke engines, which ran cleaner but were heavier and more complex. Evinrude faced a crossroads: abandon their two-stroke heritage or find a way to reinvent it for a new era. The challenge was daunting. For a company built on innovation, the stakes had never been higher. Every engineer, every executive knew that the next step would define whether Evinrude's name would continue to mean progress or become a relic of the past. As the pressure mounted, Evinrude's leadership made a bold decision. Rather than follow the crowd, they would double down on what made them famous. The answer, they believed, lay in radical new technology that could satisfy regulators and preserve the brand's identity. The stage was set for one of the most ambitious engineering gambles in marine history, a gamble that would carry the weight of a century's reputation on its back. The promise of phytate direct injection was supposed to save Evinrude from extinction. Instead, it nearly ended the brand overnight. In 1996, Outboard Marine Corporation rushed the fixed ram injection system into production, hoping to leapfrog rivals and satisfy new emissions laws. The technology, developed with a German partner, looked impressive on paper. Cleaner exhaust, better mileage, and the muscle of a two-stroke. But OMC's factories were running on aging equipment, and quality control had slipped. Engines rolled out with uneven calibration, subpar components, and software that couldn't keep up with real-world conditions. Within months, the nightmare began. Boaters reported engines running hot, knocking, and losing power. Some didn't just overheat, they suffered explosive failures. Pistons melted, rods shattered, and in the worst cases, fragments tore through the engine block. Dealers found themselves replacing power heads not just once, but 2 or 3 times for the same customer. Each fix was temporary. The root problems, detonation, oil starvation, and faulty sensors remained unsolved. Field reports described engines failing after just a handful of hours on the water. The warranty claims piled up at a pace OMC couldn't handle. Service centers were overwhelmed, and frustrated owners waited months for answers. Lawsuits followed, fueled by stories of ruined vacations and stranded families. The engine that was supposed to be Evinrude's savior became its greatest liability. Trust in the brand evaporated almost overnight. Sales collapsed, and dealers canceled orders by the hundreds. For a company that once sold a third of all outboards in America, the reversal was stunning. By December 2000, the situation was unsalvageable. OMC filed for bankruptcy, its assets auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. The Fayette disaster had torched a century of goodwill in just 4 years. When Bombardier Recreational Products stepped in to buy the remnants, they inherited not just a legendary name, but the fallout from one of the worst engineering crises in marine history. The memory of melted pistons and unanswered warranties would haunt every step of Evinrude's next chapter. The E-TEC Outboard was designed to be nothing short of revolutionary. At its core sat a direct fuel injection system, a leap beyond the old carbureted two-strokes. Instead of mixing oil and fuel by hand, the E-TEC used a high-pressure injector to deliver fuel directly into each cylinder, with the timing and amount controlled by an onboard computer. This allowed for an engine that ran cleaner and used less fuel, meeting the strictest EPA standards, so much so that in 2004, the E-TEC became the first outboard to win the EPA's Clean Air Excellence Award. The engineering didn't stop there. Evinrude's team built in an electronic oil metering system that measured engine load and RPM, adjusting oil delivery on the fly. Owners no longer needed to worry about mixing oil into their gas or guessing the right ratio. The system promised to cut oil consumption by as much as half compared to older designs. But this level of automation introduced a new kind of risk. If a sensor failed or the computer made a wrong calculation, the engine could lose lubrication in seconds, often with no warning until catastrophic damage had already begun. A marine engineer who worked on early E-TEC systems described the engine as a race car with a fishing license. The block was lighter than most four-strokes, and the compression ratio was higher. That meant more power per pound, but also less forgiveness for bad fuel, coolant problems, or even a single faulty sensor. Everything depended on the electronic control module, or ECM, a proprietary computer that managed injection, timing, oiling, and diagnostics. Only authorized dealers with BRP's BUDS software could access the ECM for troubleshooting or updates. For owners, this meant that even a minor problem could require a trip to a certified shop with independent mechanics locked out by software restrictions. Evinrude's marketing leaned into the promise of simplicity. No dealer maintenance for 3 years or 300 hours, ads proclaimed. The self-winterization feature, activated by a single button, automatically fogged the engine for storage, aiming to make off-season prep as easy as possible. For many boaters, the idea of 3 maintenance-free years sounded like a dream. In reality, the system's complexity meant that the line between worry-free operation and sudden, expensive trouble was razor-thin. On paper, E-TEC was a triumph of engineering, a cleaner, lighter, more powerful outboard that seemed to outclass the competition. But underneath the awards and bold claims, the engine's reliance on perfect calibration and proprietary controls would set the stage for a new kind of fragility. The very features that promised to save the brand would soon reveal their own hidden costs. Salt spray, sun, and vibration test every outboard, but E-TEC's high-tech design introduced new weak spots that didn't always show up in the lab. On the water, small failures could cascade into major breakdowns. One of the most common complaints centered on ignition coils, especially in early models. Owners described sudden engine cutouts, sometimes at full throttle, traced back to internal shorts in the coil windings. The number 3 coil, in particular, developed a reputation for failure, with electrical arcing triggered by repeated thermal cycling. Forums filled with stories of stranded boaters and warning lights flashing short circuit detected. A replacement coil cost around $100 to $130, but the real toll was lost weekends, tows back to the dock, and the anxiety that came with not knowing if the fix would last. High-pressure injectors were another pain point. The E-TEC solenoid-driven injectors delivered atomized fuel with surgical precision, but that same precision left little room for error. Early solenoid coils sometimes failed internally, or nozzles clogged from even minor fuel contamination. When an injector went bad, the price tag could reach $400 to $600 each, plus labor. Some owners reported replacing multiple injectors within the first 500 hours, especially in saltwater environments or with inconsistent fuel quality. A handful of technical service bulletins addressed these problems, offering upgraded parts, but not every engine saw relief. Thermal stress haunted the lightweight blocks. E-TEC's higher compression ratios squeezed more power from less metal, but also left the engine vulnerable to overheating if coolant passages clogged or thermostats stuck. Reports surfaced of cylinder scoring and piston ring failures, sometimes after only 100 hours of use. The root causes ranged from faulty sensors to minor blockages, issues that a traditional two-stroke might have shrugged off, but which could cripple an E-TEC in minutes. One owner described a season ruined by a failed thermostat and a $2,500 rebuild bill. Every new feature, oil metering, direct injection, computer control, brought with it a new way to fail. For some, the engine ran flawlessly for years. For others, a single sensor glitch or a run of bad fuel meant repeated trips to the dealer and mounting repair costs. The promise of effortless boating collided with the reality of fragile power, and owners were left to wonder whether the next outing would end in adventure or frustration. Dealers found themselves at the crossroads of promise and reality. Evinrude's technical leap demanded more than engineering skill. It required a new kind of business investment. To diagnose even basic problems, shops had to buy BRP's BUDS software. The upfront cost for a BUDS kit could run into the thousands, with annual subscription fees on top. For smaller dealers, this was a heavy burden. Without BUDS, even a simple warning light meant turning customers away or risking incomplete repairs. Parts pricing added another layer. A replacement ignition coil might cost an owner $100 to $130, but injectors ranged from $400 to $600 each. The electronic management module, the brain of the engine, could set a customer back $800 to $2,000 if it failed. These figures don't include labor, and warranty coverage often depended on strict documentation. In some regions, warranty claim approval rates lagged behind the national average, leaving dealers to eat costs or pass them to frustrated boaters. One Florida shop reported dozens of denied claims in a single summer, blaming inconsistent BRP support and vague policy changes. Dealer David East remembers the chaos. "My phone rang off the hook for 3 days straight," he said, recalling a wave of calls from customers desperate to keep their Evinrudes running. Owners who had paid a premium for low-maintenance engines now faced long waits for parts, and in some cases, surprise repair bills that rivaled the price of a used car. East's shop, like many, had to stockpile high-failure parts and keep BUDS licenses up to date, just to avoid sending loyal customers elsewhere. As the dealer network shrank, the bottleneck tightened. Fewer certified shops meant longer travel for service. In some rural areas, boaters drove hours just to clear an error code. Independent mechanics, locked out by software restrictions, watched business slip away. The economic pain rippled outward, from owners to dealers to entire communities that once depended on Evinrude's steady presence. The promise of effortless boating was now tangled in a web of proprietary tools, inconsistent warranty support, and mounting repair bills. In 2014, Evinrude introduced the E-TEC G2, a bold leap meant to redefine the outboard market. The G2 wasn't just an engine, it was a showcase of digital integration featuring iSteer electronic steering, iTrim automatic trim, and full digital controls that promised seamless connection with modern boat systems. Owners could even customize the cowling's colors to match their rigs. On paper, the G2 offered cleaner emissions, higher torque, and better fuel economy than most four-strokes. But this technological leap came with a hidden cost: complexity. For dealers, supporting the G2 meant a major investment. BRP required new rounds of technician training, updated diagnostic tools, and fresh inventory for the unique parts and electronics. The price tag for retraining and equipment upgrades ran high, especially for smaller shops already stretched thin by earlier E-TEC demands. Many independent dealers faced with these costs chose to leave the Evinrude network altogether. As a result, the number of certified service centers shrank just as the engines were becoming more dependent on specialized support. The consequences soon became public. During a high-profile bass fishing tournament, an angler running a G2 suffered a visible engine failure on stage. The incident, captured on video and shared across social media, fueled doubts about the new technology. For a brand built on reliability, the optics were damaging. The G2's promise of digital simplicity was overshadowed by stories of stranded boaters and frustrated owners unable to find trained technicians. The once wide dealer network had thinned, isolating loyal customers and amplifying every misstep. Evinrude's ambition to lead through innovation now left the brand exposed, with fewer allies and rising skepticism in the boating world. At 5:00 p.m. on May 27, 2020, Bombardier Recreational Products issued a notice that landed like a bomb across the boating world. Evinrude outboard production was over, effective immediately. Dealers and owners learned of the shutdown not from a gradual rollout, but from an abrupt corporate announcement. No warning, no transition plan, just a line drawn in the sand. In an instant, a brand that had survived world wars, economic crashes, and a century of competition was gone. The fallout was immediate and raw. Dealers scrambled to freeze orders, cancel shipments, and assess the value of inventory that had become obsolete overnight. One dealer described an emergency conference call where staff tried to tally up losses. Dozens of engines on the floor, parts shelves filled with now orphaned components, and a summer's worth of promised boat deliveries suddenly in limbo. Some shops had invested heavily in G2 tooling and training just months before, only to find their entire business model upended in a single evening. Online forums lit up with disbelief and anger. A post timestamped just hours after the announcement captured the shock. At 5 p.m. on May 27, 2020, BRP announced they were ending production of the Evinrude E-TEC Outboard engine. At that moment in time, I was not prepared. That message echoed across hundreds of threads as owners tried to make sense of what the shutdown meant for their warranties, their parts supply, and the value of their boats. Financial damage spread quickly. Dealers reported six-figure inventory losses, with no clear guidance from BRP on buybacks or support. Owners faced the prospect of running high-tech engines with no future factory support, and many feared that parts and service would dry up within months. The sense of betrayal ran deep, not just for the loss of a product, but for the sudden erasure of a legacy that had defined American boating for generations. In a matter of hours, Evinrude went from icon to orphan, leaving its community adrift. On May 27, 2020, BRP announced an immediate halt to all Evinrude outboard production, ending a legacy that began in 1907. The documentary reveals how the promise of E-TEC's maintenance-free, clean technology was undercut by real-world failures, costly repairs, and gaps in dealer support. Owners faced recurring ignition coil and injector breakdowns, with documented repair bills often exceeding the value of the engines themselves. Despite the 2004 EPA Clean Air Excellence Award, internal company documents and warranty statistics confirmed persistent reliability issues. Many technical details behind the G2's field failures and the full financial impact on small dealers remain undisclosed. Today, Evinrude owners are left without factory support, and the marine industry continues to debate whether innovation was rushed at the cost of customer trust. What's clear is that Evinrude's rise and fall stands as one of boating's most sobering case studies, where engineering ambition collided with market reality, and a century-old name vanished almost overnight.